So I just uploaded a few videos on immigration and the Mexican-American War. And now I want to talk about the St. Patrick's Battalion. I mentioned them briefly in one of my other videos, but I didn't really go into too much detail on who they are or who they were. And I learned about them on my own when I do a lot of research on my own, and I learned a lot of things that I was never taught in high school or college, and therefore I'm under the impression that most people don't know a lot of these things that I'm about to share with you. And so this video is going to be a little different than my other videos. This is more of a historical history lesson. So let me click on this video and I'm going to do a little bit of reaction because this guy does a better explanation of who the St. Patrick's Battalion was, and then I'll give you some commentary as well.
Few events in American history had as much impact on the future of the nation as the war with Mexico in 1846. And yet in America, we hardly study that war. You can take an entire class on U.S. history in high school or even college and maybe not even hear mention of the war with Mexico.
See, and he is 100% correct. I never was taught about the Mexican-American War in high school, or if I was, it was so brief that it's not even a thought. And I do remember a lot of my history. And in college, it was just like that. It was I don't even know if he mentioned it in American History 1. It doesn't. It was so quick. The most I got was that the people who fought, the generals who fought in that war ended up fighting in the American Civil War. The Civil War was more important in history class than this war. But this war to me is important, especially nowadays with immigration being the hot topic that it is. But yet most people don't know about it. Let me tell me in the comments, were you taught about this war? All right.
But that might be because it was a long time ago. It might be because it was overshadowed by the Civil War, which came about a decade and a half later. But it is a war that we should not forget.
And I have a theory on the reason why they don't really teach it in school. And the reason is because if you were to learn this war, it doesn't look good for America. And it kind of justifies immigrants, or at least Mexican immigrants wanting to come to the southern United States,
It largely defines our relationship with Mexico. Well, the war is not forgotten at all. It's sometimes called the war that America can't remember and that Mexico can't forget. It redefined our nation. It led to the acquisition of the American West. The Southwest all the way up into Colorado and Utah were acquired as a result of the war with Mexico. And while it briefly represented a period of national unity where the nation came together in common cause, the army that fought for America in the Mexican War was an all-volunteer force. It also represented some of the divisions that were eventually driving the nation towards the Civil War. And nothing represents that more starkly than the little-known fact that one of the very best units fighting for Mexico in the Mexican-American War was a group of Americans who had deserted from the American army in order to fight on behalf of Mexico. And who they were and why they chose to fight for Mexico says a lot about what was going on in America in the 1840s and something about what would drive America to the Civil War in the 1860s. And that's one of the reasons why the St. Patrick's Battalion deserves to be remembered. The core of the group had actually joined the Mexican army before war was even declared, especially a group of Irishmen who had deserted General Zachary Taylor's Army of the Rio Grande under the leadership of a man named John Riley. And
this is my hack for working smart. Monday.com. Let me show you how I use Monday.com to create a tailor-made.
And they were actually fighting for Mexico in the first battle of the war, the siege of Fort Texas. And the fact that they deserted before war was actually declared would become important later. Their first battle as a recognized unit of the Mexican army was the Battle of Monterrey, where they manned a battery of artillery, and that's where they started to gain their reputation as one of the best units in the Mexican army. They fought very bravely and in fact drove back a couple of the mass attacks in the center of the town. And yet their effort was not enough to keep the Mexican army from deciding that they would retreat and abandon their strong position in Monterrey. And they distinguished themselves yet again in the next battle, the Battle of Buena Vista, where they not only inflicted a huge amount of American casualties and helped to capture an American artillery battery, but they withstood several counterattacks. And yet one more time, their heroics were not enough to keep the Mexican army from defeat. In the battle report, the commander of the Mexican forces, General Francisco Meja.
I do want to say this, that Mexico was not ready for this war because they didn't want to go to war. This war was something that America wanted. They had planned this invasion of Mexico to do this land grab, and Mexico was not ready for this because it caught them by surprise. And that's pretty much what gave the American troops an advantage, was that they went to war with a country that wasn't expecting any trouble really from their neighbors, and well, the results are as follows, you know.
Described their action as worthy of the most consummate praise, and several received decorations for bravery. As the war went on, they would continue to attract deserters, and they became known as one of the best units in the Mexican army, resilient fighters, although part of that probably had to do with the fact that they knew that if they were captured, they would likely be hung as traitors. And that would come to a test after the bloody Battle of Churubusco in 1847. Fighting in the town center, the San Patricios held the center for a long time. But when the Mexican army that was with them tried to surrender as they ran out of ammunition, the San Patricios refused to allow them to surrender, and at least twice shot dead Mexican officers who tried to raise a white flag. In the battle, 85 of the San Patricios were captured by the American army, and in the bloody fight, nearly 2/3 of the battalion were either killed or captured, with only about another 85 escaping with the Mexican army. The San Patricios who were captured were put before a military tribunal, but it was a trial where they were not allowed to offer any defense. 50 were sentenced to death. It was the largest mass execution in American history. All but a few were sentenced to death by hanging, even though contemporary articles of war stipulated firing squad. The Americans were in no mood for charity, given all the casualties that the St. Patrick's Battalion had caused. And yet a few were spared the death penalty, including John Riley. And the reason was because they had deserted before war was declared, and so their crime was simple desertion, whereas the others had been charged with deserting and joining the enemy in time of war. Still, even the ones who were not executed were treated brutally. They were whipped 50 times. They were branded on the face with a D for deserter, and then they were jailed indefinitely.
Now, I do want to say this. Part of he hasn't gone into detail, so I'm going to go into detail about it. Part of the reason why they deserted to begin with was because the majority of these guys were Irish Catholics. And at this time in America, Irish immigrants weren't really welcome. You know, immigrants have always been kind of hated. And it's just people being different, you know, and especially since they were the religion, you know, they were Catholics, and at that time I think the majority of Americans were Protestants. So a lot of these Irish immigrants joined the military. He says it's an all volunteer force, but a lot of times people join the military out of desperation, as that's like the only job that they could get, you know. And so they joined the military. The U.S. is trying to start a war, you know, so that they start sending troops to the border before war begins, trying to start something, you know, kind of like have like a false flag thing. That way they can say, oh, they attacked us. We got to go to war now. And so they sent a bunch of troops down there. And what they saw was on the Mexican side that all Mexicans are Catholic, and they could hear the church bells and everything, and they're like, "Why are we going to war with these people? These people aren't hurting us. They're they don't look like our enemy, and in fact, these people treat us better than our fellow Americans." So that was part of the reason why they decided to join the Mexican military, was because they could relate as Catholics and just as people. They were like, "Hey, look, man, this war is kind of BS. There's no reason to do this, And they saw that the war was unjust, and this is what this is kind of really heroic of standing up for others, standing up for people who are being oppressed. This is something that I kind of try to do with this channel in regards to immigration. Nobody really stands up for the immigrant. So I stand up for them. I argue in favor of immigration in so many ways. And I challenge anybody to give me a good counter argument against immigration. That isn't, that is, it's good in a way that isn't hypocritical or isn't like racist. But nobody can. I've been doing this for almost going on 10 months. One of my first videos was about immigration, and yet I still don't get the nobody wants to debate, and maybe because you can't really find something that's not hypocritical. But so I try to stand up for the immigrants, and recently I'm trying to stand up for workers' rights, individual rights. And this is what my channel, it's my main focus is on right now. So, but anywho, so they stood up for people who they saw were oppressed.
Executions occurred over 3 days, but the last 30, according to the orders of the American General Winfield Scott, were hung in full view of both armies during the Battle of Chapultepec. So why did they desert the American army to fight on behalf of the Mexicans? As you would guess from the name, the St. Patrick's Brigade, many of them were Irish, but not exclusively. There were also German Americans, Italian Americans, French Americans. There were even a few disenfranchised Americans, like escaped slaves from the South. But overwhelmingly, they were new immigrants to America. They had been in America less than a year and had not had time to form attachments to the country. In fact, it was common practice in America to sign up immigrants even as they were walking off the boat into the U.S. Army. In fact, very few of them were actually citizens. And the Mexican army had offered some strong incentives for Americans to desert and join the Mexican army. They promised citizenship, they promised land grants, they paid better than the American army. Many of these people had come to America because they were fleeing poverty in Europe, and economic incentives were a powerful motivational force. But a key factor was that the San Patricios were overwhelmingly Catholic, while the United States was largely a Protestant nation with a strong anti-Catholic sentiment. Many of the San Patricios had faced abuse at the hands of American officers who trusted neither foreigners nor Catholics, and their religion was suppressed. They were forced to attend.
And also, if you know your American history, you know how the Irish were treated in when they first got here to the United States. So it ain't no surprise that they didn't really like this country, because again, man, this country has a history of treating people who are different, lesser than dirt.
And Protestant religious services. Is it really a wonder that these people, barely having entered the United States, found more affinity with Catholic Mexico than with the Protestant United States, especially when our justification for invading Mexico was so questionable? The Treaty of Guadalupe, which ended the Mexican-American War, stipulated that those San Patricios...
Yeah, he doesn't even go... well, maybe he'll go into... I don't think he will. Into the history of why the war started. The war started because allegedly, Mexican troops attacked and killed American troops on American soil, And this is so questionable that even Abraham Lincoln at the time was like, hey, man, I want to see, he called it the spot resolution. He goes, show me the spot where this happened, Because, if we're going to go to war, shouldn't, we double check that this is what happened, that it happened on American soil? And yet, they're like, we got to go to war, And it was like, to me, I think it's a false flag, or just something made up by the government so they could go to war. Because again, the majority of the war, I think all the war was fought in Mexico. It wasn't fought in American soil, which shows you who was the aggressor. Who was really the one that wanted the war. That was the U.S. They had all the troops and they sent them. That they had been getting the numbers ready to send to Mexico, and caught them by surprise.
Were still in the custody of the American Army would be returned to Mexico. Among them was John Riley, who went back to Mexico and served for many years as an officer in the regular Mexican Army. Some of the San Patricios returned to their homes in Europe, but others made homes in Mexico and made good on those land grants that had been promised them. Both sides agree that the St. Patrick's Battalion fought very bravely, but they were never nearly enough to turn the tide in what was a very unequal conflict. To the Americans, of course, the St. Patrick's Battalion were traitors who betrayed their country, but to the Mexicans, they were heroes who came to them in their hour of need. The Mexican Army was largely made up of poorly trained conscripts, and the St. Patrick's Battalion was one of the few veteran battalions upon which the Mexican Army could depend. The desertion of the St. Patrick's Battalion suggests that the American Army was a harsh place and there was lots of desertion, but that's not really the case. In fact, it was an all-volunteer force that was brought together by patriotic zeal, and there was very little desertion during the Mexican-American War. There was, in fact, less desertion during the war than there was among the regular army in time of peace. It was instead the Mexican Army, made up largely of impressed conscripts, that had constant troubles with desertion. No, the San Patricios did not desert because of hard conditions. They deserted because of conscience. And part of that was because the Irish among them saw some similarity in what America was doing in Mexico with what they saw Great Britain doing in Ireland. But part of that was because of slavery. And their Catholic faith was offended by the institution of slavery. They could not square with their conscience, fighting on behalf of a nation that practiced the institution of slavery against a nation that had banned slavery. While the war originally brought together America in some common cause, it actually was revealing the conflicts that were tearing the nation apart, because the cause of the Mexican-American War was largely westward expansion, and that raised the question about whether all those new western states were going to be free states or slave states. In fact, the war was largely a machination of Democratic President James K. Polk, who was hoping that those states would be slave states and strengthen the hand of the slave states in the United States.
See, he kind of hit it on the head. It was Western expansion. They wanted the land from Texas to California, and they were going to get it no matter what. They were going to start something, and justify it. This is why when I hear people want to bash Mexicans or immigrants, I'm like, hey man, this land was stolen. I was arguing with some idiot on here. On a couple of videos, I made a video saying, well, they signed a treaty. Yeah, after they went all the way to Mexico City. Again, let me put a piece to your face, make you sign over your property, and say, oh no, you signed it. I don't want to hear that you signed it under duress or anything. No. You signed it fair and square. That's all that matters. Oh yeah. Like there's no context to it. Yeah, so. This is why they don't teach this in school. At least this is what I think. Because if they taught this in school, wouldn't people be like, man, what the, they probably wouldn't be as mad towards immigrants. They'd be like, yeah, America did y'all dirty. Maybe we should do something at least in favor of Mexicans. Because this land was stolen to them, just how land was stolen from the Native Americans. All right, let me see what else.
And instead, the fight that would come after would reveal all of those chasms that would eventually lead to the Civil War. And if you think about it, the cause for which the San Patricios were fighting on behalf of Mexico looks very much like the differences of conscience that drove the U.S. Civil War. And so, in that extent, you can say that really the San Patricios were firing the first shots of the U.S. Civil War. I'm the
All right, that's it. Yeah, so this This is something that was never taught to me. I found it on my own while doing my personal research on the Mexican-American War, just because I like to ask questions of, I'm always that type of person that you tell me an event, I want to find out why that event happened. All right, 9/11 happened. Okay, why did it happen? Oh, because he hates our freedom, this and that. Like, no. I want to find out from the source. Why did they say they did what they did? Pearl Harbor happened. I want to hear the Japanese side. Why did they do what they did? This is something that, again, it's not taught. That wasn't taught to me in college. I always ask, Cuban Missile Crisis. Why did Cuba want nuclear weapons? What would it cause them to want to arm themselves? I ask questions. I'm not just one to just jump on the bandwagon and say, oh yeah, America, whatever they say is right. Vietnam, whatever war you name it, yeah, it was completely just. No, nothing sketchy. So this is me. I found this out on my own. This is like a long time ago. I've been doing this for over, I want to say over 10 years now, and I've also found out a couple other historical things that don't look good towards this country, and I'm gonna share them probably right now, probably my next couple videos. So stay tuned and let me know. Did you know this about America, about the Mexican-American War, why it started? Was this taught to you? When did you learn about this? Did you know about the St. Patrick's Battalion and the history of this? This is something that it gets whitewashed because my personal opinion, it makes the U.S. look bad. But I don't know. Let me know.